Hacer una comedia romántica no es nada fácil y mucho menos que se convierta en un clásico como lo es Sleepless in Seattle. Hablé con su guionista Jeff Arch, que me contó primero cómo se le ocurrió la idea para esta producción, pero también cuáles son las cosas que considera que no están bien de esta película y cómo ve el estado actual de las comedias románticas.
We now return to Norah Ephron and Contré with our latest interview.
A romantic comedy where the two leads only speak 2 minutes. How did you pitch that idea?
I never pitched it successfully. I got a lot of great reactions when I pitched it. The best one was somebody at MGM at the time said, I like foreplay, but I can't handle 90 minutes of it. And I thought, right.
But if you've just tuned in, we're talking to Sleepless in Seattle.
You called a radio station?
If you're writing and you want to write a love story, the first thing you have to think about is what's going to keep two people apart that you can sustain, believably for 90 to 100 minutes. And all the typical ways of doing it really bothered me. It was just getting cheap. But I still tried to think of one. How can I get the two people? They always bump into each other, they're spilling coffee, whatever it is, and then they argue all the time. And that doesn't really happen in real life. Usually if somebody pisses you off and you're swearing down on the street and you don't end up in love. What if they don't meet, but they do meet on the last page of the story on top of the Empire State Building on Valentine's Day? And that question definitely changed my life. And that was the root.
What was so special about your wife?
Well, Dr. Marshallfield's style, I think. It was like magic.
There were three questions going on in my head at the time. And one was that, if you can pull off a love story where the people don't meet until the end, you've really got something. It's not going to be an easy sell, but it's going to be something. There's a question that Meg Ryan's character asks in the story where she says, I just don't want to end up always wondering what might have been and knowing I could have done something. And that's exactly where I was in my life at that time. I was considering quitting. It was just too much disappointment, too much, hurt, too much rejection, too many setbacks. I couldn't see my way to how success was going to come out of this. And my second child had just been born, was a son. He was 1 month old when I was asking these questions. And another question that came is, what can I tell these kids about going after their dreams if I don't go after mine?
I'm having all of these fantasies about some man I have never even met who lives in Seattle.
I wrote it, then I got replaced once, then I came back, then I got replaced again. Then Norah replaced that guy and wrote a script, and there was a dispute with the original director, and Norah got the job of directing and not just being a screenwriter. So she and her sister Delia took over the screenwriting, the production script. And there were a couple of times where I was called to just do something, I was in the middle of writing a whole different movies at that point. I never sat in a room with Norah and worked. We were more like step parents of the same kid.
If you weren't in the same room, it's like giving your child to another
exactly
step.
Like, and that's how we would relate to each other, whether it was on a set or just in phone calls, along the process. I would just say, how's the kid? and because really was like I raised a child, and then was a divorce, and then she was raising the kid, and she had to raise it, every day you're doing your best, and every day you're making it your own, but it's never completely your own. She had license to do whatever she want with it. It wasn't my script anymore. Once you cast the check, it's not your script. It belongs to whoever bought it. And she was working for the people, for TriStar. I was happy that she made the movie that I wrote. I wasn't so happy with some of the writing things that she did.
What things in particular? Because you mentioned it twice, that there are a few things that she didn't like of the final movie.
It's hard for me to watch the whole beginning of the movie until Meg Ryan's in the car listening to him on the radio. Those were scenes that I put in, a family dinner, introducing the guy to the family, and then a scene with the mother. but there were some story logic things going on in there that I just thought she kind of didn't have to fiddle with.
He's a lovely man, Annie. I know, he is wonderful, isn't he?
There's one example that drives me nuts, and this is because when I write, and if you have writers, if this is who you're, I'm a monster for story logic. So there's a scene up in this attic. My original script, they were washing dishes together, mother and daughter, after, everybody's out in the other room. And I got to hand it, as a guy, I didn't understand the power of the symbol of a wedding dress. So to move that scene up to a wedding dress was not a bad idea. I wasn't crazy about who they cast for the mother. I thought she was just, not really, she picked this fiddle-dee-dee kind of, and she actually uses those words, but she starts to tell Meg the story of how she and her father met, she and her husband met. And there's two things about that scene. I'm really going to get down here. There's two things about that scene. One is she asks Annie how they met.
How did it happen? Well, silly, really.
And Annie tells the whole story about the sandwich, and they got each other's lunch order. And I'm going, a mother and a daughter who were that close, she would have known a long time ago how they met.
Yeah.
And so I never would have written that. She would have known a long time ago how they met. So I'm sitting there kind of going like that and trying to breathe. And then she talks about, I got to say, I wrote a beautiful scene about a waiter at Atlantic City and taking a walk at midnight on the steel pier, and he held my hand. And she breaks that speech up to say, oh, I probably told you this a million times before, but I'm going to tell you again. And like, why would you do that? If she told her a million times before, it would be Meg's job to say, Mom, this again, but now you need to listen. I would see that, Mom, this again, this time you need to hear it. So once we get past that opening, which is openings of films are often mistakenly, and I teach writers by the hundreds and thousands, openings of films are not about information, they're about emotion. So there was so much information trying to be crammed into that opening. And, Norah should have been a better writer than that, because what you want in the beginning is emotion and then information. And look, I hit below the belt in terms of engaging an audience emotionally. I killed an 8-year-old's mother, on the first page. So father and son standing at a funeral, if you're not, and I think my favorite line early on, when I really thought when I was writing it that I was getting somewhere, was I got when we had our first kid, I bought like 2 weeks worth of frozen things for the, just pull out and heat up to eat, because there weren't going to be time to make meals and everything. So I remembered that. And he's looking out the window at his kid, and they're in the kitchen, and his sister says, do you know how to make juice? And she says something about all these things, you can microwave them in 5 minutes. No. Do you know how to make juice? And he turns around and says, microwave 5 minutes. And that told me everything about him. I wasn't directing him. I'm not even sure Norah directed him. I think Tom directed himself and did an incredible job. She gave him the room, she gave him the space, but he knew how to prepare. We did speak about it after, he just got that guy. As a director, she got the movie made, and that's what mattered. She had the star power to draw in Tom Hanks. At the time, this was 1990, and it was very hard to cast a guy, because it's, guys at the time, and today still, but way more then, thought, if I talking to a radio psychologist or talking about your feelings, that's too sensitive. I'm not going to play, nobody who's a real man would do that. So, Tom took some convincing, and Norah was pretty big in that department. And she brought in Rob Reiner, who, Meg Ryan wanted to do it from the start before Norah was ever involved, just based on my original script. Meg Ryan was not attached, but seriously interested. Then it went through a whole lot of, things. But overall, the way I look at it is, I built a Christmas tree and I put my ornaments on the tree, and she took some of the ornaments off and put her own on, but it's still my tree.
I want to meet you.
Dad, read this, read this.
Where is Seattle? Right. Where's Baltimore?
Ah, it's right there.
You have the love story between Tom and Sam and Meg Ryan character, but it's also a love story between Sam and his kid and Jonah.
You're right. It's both. It's a love story between Sam and his kid, but it's really a love story between Meg and the kid.
Of course, yeah.
Tom Hanks is not looking for love.
Yeah.
He just wants to. He had it great, and then a terrible thing happened, and now he's just trying to keep things from getting worse. But he
Yeah.
doesn't have any goals. He goes to work every day, and he's a professional.
Yeah.
He's not thinking of women, and he's not thinking of new mothers, and he's not thinking of any of that. And it's Jonah who makes this happen. And so it's a love story between Jonah and Annie. So again, when I was writing this and coming up with it, had I not had kids, I wouldn't have known how to do this. But when I kept saying, what is going to make a guy go to the Empire State Building when he doesn't want to? Well, his kid gets on a plane. Now you have to.
The casting of the kid was important. So did you write it as we saw it, or like did Ross give this character anything of him? Because he gave me the biggest laugh of the film.
He which was that? Because I have a feeling it wasn't a line that I wrote. But what?
No, he with his faces, he was like he had a sense of
it's
timing with comedy that's it's not usual in a kid that age.
It's interesting. What happened is they originally cast a different kid. And this happens a lot in acting, is that the kid got through his auditions and the kid got through this and that. And we were on the set. That was one of the times I was out in Seattle, and they were shooting that attic scene with the mother, but down off that set in a different part of the stage, Tom was reading with Ross, because what happened is there was absolutely the original kid, and I'll never say his name because he deserves dignity, but he made it through everything, but when push came to shove, all he had at the audition, and there just wasn't the chemistry, and there was a lot of panic, and there was a lot of this and that, and then somehow they went and got Ross. And while I'm watching them shoot this scene where I'm going, why would you break up that speech? She would absolutely know when you met. You don't wait and tell your mother until the night you're engaged. I'm sitting there going, and then I look down and I see Tom and the kid, running through the nightmare scene, where the kid has a nightmare and calls for his mother. And, that only came from, when my daughter was born, we were brand new parents, and, she would cry in the night. She was an infant and she'd cry in the night. And, we tried to have it be my job to go down there, but she was crying for her mother. And when somebody comes and it's not her mother, it just made her cry even harder. I mean, she loved me, but at night it was her mother that she wanted. And I thought, well, have the kid have a nightmare and cry for his mom, because that's what he would do. And so that scene, I mean, they worked that out. I don't know if Ross actually wrote any of his lines, but I know Tom worked a lot on that scene, and a lot on the original telephone scene to make it his own. And every ornament that he put on the tree, I adore it.
It's okay. What was that about, huh?
It was sinking.
What was?
A house. There was water coming in all the windows.
Nowadays with social media, do you see it working?
I don't know how it could. We had a chance to think about that at one point, from like 2007 to 2013, we were trying to turn it into a Broadway musical. And the question came up time after time after time, can you update it? And you can't. I mean, you want to find out who somebody, I mean, the technology they had at the time, that was it. There was no internet yet. There was this thing called Nexus that journalists and police used. But if you weren't a journalist and if you weren't a cop, you didn't have these searches. And she's typing out this name letter by letter, the little green prompt, To us at the time, that was incredible technology. But today, you go on Facebook, you go on Instagram, there he is, there's 10 of his friends. And there would be a way to do it, I guess, but I wouldn't be interested. What Meg's character needed was information before she made a decision. You can get all that information in 5 minutes now.
You're the most attractive man I ever laid ears on.
The guy could be a crackhead.
Actually, he sounded nice.
when I talked about 3 questions that I asked myself back in the beginning, I can close you with this one. And I really did ask this question that night. What could make 2 people walk out of a movie theater in Finland holding hands? Now, I don't know where that question came from. It's hard to do romantic comedy. It's really hard. And most of the ways you do it are kind of false. But the audience is so carried along by the charm and just by the wish fulfillment. There was one, I won't say who, but one came out pretty big, either on Apple TV or with a big splash. I don't know if it was in theaters. It was definitely in theater, and there's some pretty big stars in it. And my daughter-in-law was watching the beginning of it. I watched 2 minutes of this movie. I didn't even read the description. And I said, here are the next 10 things that are going to happen. And they happened. And it didn't, she turned it off. But for anyone else, it wouldn't have killed their enjoyment just because they're along for the ride. But I shouldn't know. Nobody should be able to know, here's what's going to happen. And here's how, you just know if it's a romantic comedy, they're going to end up together at the end. And let's just sit back and see it happen. So I'm not crazy about where they are now, because I'm not crazy about where they ever were, because they're really hard to do. And each generation only, pulls out a few good ones. So first, it was always a hard thing to do at all. Second, it's a hard thing to do really well. And third, to do it memorably. The more authentic, either the more authentic or the more magical something is. And I try to combine both. I try to do the magic with, it was about magic. It was about finding magic in your life instead of just life. And those were the big themes that were going on in my life at the time as a 35-year-old father of 2 who hadn't succeeded yet.
This is the one I like.
There is no way that we are going on a plane to meet some woman who could be a crazy, sick lunatic. Didn't you see Fatal Attraction?